golfers and golf heads, Tom Saguto here, coming at you with an episode on helping you with your wedge game, and more particularly your bunker play and your success in the bunker depending on the wedges you use. So the wedges that I've got here, I'm going to talk about differences between the wedges and also the bounce on the club and why that's significant. And maybe it's something you haven't looked at before, but it's significant for many reasons, which we're about to talk about. If you're looking at my clubs here are two different wedges that I use. This is the sand wedge. It's been used plenty. It's got some rust on the side. And this is my gap wedge. And you might not have a wedge that has these particular degree numbers as far as looking at 56 and 52. 56 degrees sand wedge most commonly. 52 degrees is a common gap wedge number. There's also numbers below the degrees indicating the degrees of bounce on the club. About to explain what these do. This is 14 degrees of bounce on my sand wedge and 10 degrees of bounce on my gap wedge. These are very important numbers, so let's stay tuned. First of all, if your wedge does not have any of these numbers, it's usually a generic representation of a sand. It just says S wedge. It doesn't have a degree on it. This might be applicable to you, but it will depend on a couple of things, which I'm about to hit on here. But if you do have wedges like this, this will help you pick the right wedges for the right situation. Why am I talking to you about choosing the right wedges? Well, when you go out to certain golf courses, there are different conditions. There are deeper bunkers, there are shallower bunkers, different types of sand that affect how the club will dig in the sand and how the ball will respond because of the digging in the club in the sand. And I can testify to my experience playing up north in Pennsylvania and also here in Myrtle Beach that up north in Pennsylvania I had deeper bunkers with a lot of sand. Here in Myrtle Beach, not so much. There's usually not too much sand before you hit the dirt layer. And it's easier to maintain that way. So that's just two differences in golf courses or locations that can provide with that certain difference in lies for bunkers. Okay, bounce though. Let's get into bounce. If you look at these two wedges, you'll notice that the sand wedge on the right has a wider sole than the one on the left, the gap wedge. So this one is wider sole width, meaning that from the leading edge here to the back of the club, it is wider than the gap wedge. And the reason why is because it has also more of this bounce number. Remember the bounce number. This is important. The wider this sole, the less likely it is that your club is going to dig into the ground or get thrown into the ground. When you are in the sand, and it's deep sand in particular, the last thing you want is your club to get stuck into the ground because the ball won't go anywhere. The club goes under the ball and gets stuck. If you're having this problem, it's likely that you're using a wedge that doesn't have enough sole width or doesn't have enough bounce. Bounce is there to prevent digging. It's to prevent the club from digging into the sand. It's kind of like you're landing an airplane and the bounce is like the flaps on the airplane. The reason why the pilot has flaps when you're landing is so that the plane doesn't just hit the ground so hard. So he puts flaps down so the plane doesn't take all the shock of a hard landing. It's a lot smoother and softer into the golf ball, especially in a bunker. So this translates over, meaning the more bounce you have, the higher this number, the less the club will dig in the sand. I can tell you that when I first came to Myrtle Beach and I had used this wedge successfully in Pennsylvania in the deep bunkers. When I first came to Myrtle Beach and I started using this wedge, it wasn't working well for me. Actually, I had to take it out of my bag. The reason being, the shallower bunkers here in Myrtle Beach, I started hitting scold shots and thin shots because this club was causing me not to dig at all. And in a shallow bunker, we need to dig in order to get under the ball. So what happened is I would end up hitting some poor shots with this wedge. Bringing me into the gap wedge. This gap wedge has 10 degrees of bounce. It also has a thinner sole width than the sand wedge. The thinner the sole width, the more likely the club is to dig. What this means for you is that if you're playing in a place with shallow bunkers, such as the course that I play at, or Myrtle Beach in general, a lot of courses have shallow bunkers here at Myrtle Beach, you need something that can dig so you can blast the ball out. So a wedge with 10 degrees of bounce, like this one, helps me get out of the sand, no problem, around here. Okay? So let's recap just for a second here. When in shallow bunkers, use a less bounce degree club, so something around 10 degrees or lower. In deep bunkers, with a lot of sand beneath the surface, use something with more bounce, a higher degree of bounce, so you don't dig and get the club stuck in the sand. So we're looking at 14 degrees right here. Something in that range, okay? That rule of thumb, deep bunkers, use more bounce. Shallow bunkers, use less bounce. This will help you immediately get the ball out better, because club selection in a bunker is critical to your success in there. One last tidbit. The sole width is not just used in bounce club, getting the ball out of bunker. In fact, golfers who, if you've noticed, there's different classifications of golf clubs. There's super game improvement clubs, there's game improvement clubs, and then there's tour clubs or player clubs. And a lot of clubs here's what you'll find why certain clubs are easier to hit than others. So the wider the sole, the less likely the club is to dig. This is my 6-iron over here. It has a very narrow sole. Since this club, the sand wedge, has a wider sole, it's less likely to dig in the ground, meaning that it's less likely that I will hit behind the ball, like the flaps. More flaps keeps the club from digging, so it keeps the club in the air longer. This is why on the back of game improvement clubs and other irons, if you've got a lot of sole width back here, it's there to help you hit the ball better, especially if you struggle with consistent contact. They design them for players with poor contact so that they will hit the ball first more often. The sole keeps the club from digging. I've actually seen a gentleman hit a ball behind it like 6 inches and still hit the ball 125 yards onto a green with a wedge, because the sole width and the bounce on the club is much greater, preventing the club from digging and getting stuck. He ends up hitting the ball and it goes cleanly towards the target. So having more sole width is not a bad thing. It's great if you struggle with consistent contact. More sole width can help you hit the greens more frequently, because you won't, if you struggle with chunking the ball, more sole width will prevent you from chunking the ball. And then on the other side of that, if you have a big sole width and you're a consistent ball striker, you might want to try something with a narrower sole, because you might be limiting yourself in that there's such a big feel difference with a club that's got this thinner sole width. You are able to work the ball better and control your point of contact much better. Things to consider with the width of the sole of the club and when you're choosing a club. Recapping all of that, if you're an inconsistent player with ball striking, a club with a wider sole width will not dig into the ground behind the ball as often. A club with a narrower sole width is best suited for lower handicappers and more consistent ball strikers, because they can fine-tune it in their swing to their liking. These are pretty deep golf elements that can help you improve your game instantly. This is not even a swing tip. It's just something that you should consider when you look at your clubs and what you're playing and knowing why you're playing them, instead of just dealing with what you have and knowing the outcome is just a variable on its own. A lot of times the club dictates your outcome in this case. So the club design has a huge effect on your ball striking as well. Tom Saguto here, PGA member and founder of SagutoGolf, helping you to make the most out of the game you love. Now that you've learned about the bounce on the wedges, I expect you all to be getting out of the bunker, no problem, every time, because you know what's going to dig and what won't dig, and you know what situations to use each wedge in. Have an awesome day.